How are your officers doing on something like this? I know just reading that affidavit was hard.
Yeah, and recreating the crime is very difficult on these officers, especially our detectives who are working firsthand with this. They all have kids of their own, two of them very young kids. And so I think that it really takes its toll day in and day out. Everybody was driven towards that goal of making sure that we found justice. And justice is kind of a larger term of making the arrest, as we know, is just that first piece of that. And now working with the state's attorney's office to make sure that we can secure convictions on these is very, very important to our detectives. So, the work doesn't end.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's far from done.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I think what a lot of folks don't know is that when you all release, or the state's attorney releases an arrest warrant affidavit or arrest report, you're not necessarily putting everything in there.
Correct. So obviously any exculpatory information needs to be in there. Anything that would say that a person didn't do it. However, what we do is we are limiting this just to get probable cause. And then obviously that investigation continues well beyond that arrest warrant stage of the case. Obviously, we're working with the medical examiner's office, we're working with DCF, we're working with the family, just trying to backtrack this past year of Mimi's life from after she graduated school.
So much to unpack here. You guys are investigating it. There's child advocates investigating, DCF's investigating, we're investigating it. And one of the things I've noticed is that there's been a lot of video just in the last week from both Waterbury and from New Britain. You really haven't gotten a chance to view any of it or some of it, but from what you're hearing from your men and women, what's the takeaway?
Yeah, I've not had a chance to review that. I've reviewed our video, obviously. We do not have access, but I think this is bringing us, since we required to have body cam, this policing in Connecticut has really evolved, well, across the country and across the world, actually. But where now your normal citizens, your news crews are actually there for every minute of our interviews, our investigations, obviously not when they're by themselves working and reviewing paperwork and those sorts of things, but every interaction that we have with them is captured in video. And so I think it's a different realm, and I remember when DNA first started making its scene in criminology and in criminal work, and how it really changed. When we first started, fingerprints were kind of the end-all be-all, and then DNA changed it. And I think now, whether it be juries, whether it be the media, people are having that ability to review the videos and see firsthand what people are saying, not saying, and the interactions that police are having with them.
One of the things that became clear in the video from both New Britain and from Waterbury and from Farmington is that this isn't a case that happened in just one spot, right?
Yeah, so originally, obviously, Mimi was found in New Britain, and our suspects obviously were living in New Britain at the time. And so everybody thought that it was a New Britain case. Well, as New Britain started to investigate this, they determined that there was a period in time where they lived in Farmington for a short period, some months. And as their investigation started unraveling a timeline, that's when they realized that Farmington may be involved, and then called us, we called the state's attorney's office, and now we're in 2 different judicial districts. So we have New Britain state's attorney, and we also have the Litchfield state's attorney working together with the 2 police departments. And to your point, it didn't end there, because you saw that then Waterbury's involved, and we've enlisted the help of many different agencies to assist during this investigation.
And do you think that there's more of a story in New Britain than has been investigated so far by folks like me? Because it seems like so much of her life was there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've narrowed this timeline down, that we know that this occurred in Farmington. And I think that as the prosecution and as the prosecutor starts revealing the case, I think more and more information will come out. I think that obviously the family, the community deeply impacted really is a New Britain community, because to your point, that's where, you know, her life and her family and her friends and all the loved ones that surrounded her, that community. And we saw that by the memorial. And I think that, you know, the media has done a good job of capturing this memorial and what the death of a child in their community meant to that community. People who didn't know her, and brought to tears and that sort of thing. So I think it's very, very important not to lose sight of not only bringing justice for Mimi, but those that were close to her that were so deeply impacted by this horrific crime.
And certainly, as you can imagine, we're hearing a lot from both family, friends, viewers, and they are talking about that video from Farmington, because you guys were the first ones to put out some video. And one of the questions I keep getting from viewers on that one time where your officers had the interaction with Carla, how did they not smell that body if it was in the basement? And I know that's a tough question to ask, but our viewers are asking it, and I have to represent them.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the question. I mean, it's a legitimate question, and don't think that those officers weren't saying, boy, how did I not? You know, I think information of how she was found has been revealed out there. Obviously, there was, they think that there was a solution used to mask the smell. And so those officers did not signify noticing anything that was out of the ordinary. And just because, you know, I think that what we need to also put into perspective is, because I've seen some misinformation out there that these basements are all connected and that there is a separate room in the basement, laundry room, by doors separated, but also if you have a container, if you have plastic bags, you can mask that smell. So I think that those officers obviously are bringing themselves back because nobody was thinking about this, right? This wasn't like they went there to investigate a suspicious death. They went there for a noise complaint, something that we go to thousands of times. And I think you can see by the officers' conduct there, most of the time when we go to noise complaints, it involves a domestic kind of issue, right? Maybe a fight, those sorts of things. And they wanted to make sure that there was no injuries to the people there, and asked about the kids. And obviously we do not have the benefit of knowing how many kids live there, how many kids they have, who could be staying over a friend's house. I mean, that's not the police. That's not a record that we would have. So I think the officers themselves have obviously brought themselves back to say, man, did I miss something? Was there something there? And the reality of it is no. I mean, they have not. You know, there was no real smell to them. So.
I mean, the guess is perhaps that I know the first visit was in September. She probably was dead then, but we can't say definitively. Second visits was December 29th, 30th, and then there was a third, I think, early Feb. You could presume that it was cold enough that, not to be graphic, but that maybe you wouldn't smell it then.
Yeah, and the issue is we only had one interaction with them. We were called there on 3 separate occasions, but there was only one time that somebody actually answered the door and that we were able to actually talk to somebody there, and that's the one that you saw, and that we released. And I thought it was important for the public to see, because I know that everybody second guesses. And, you know, the one thing that I think that you have to really, you know, warn about is knowing what we know now, to go back to then and judge what was done is absolutely incorrect.
It's Monday morning quarterbacking.
It is. Which we do. Listen,
you need to do it.
We do that, right?
Yeah.
We do that so that we get better at what we do.
So do
There's
we.
no doubt about it. But you cannot judge somebody based upon, because if I could do that, imagine what I could do with the stock market, right? If I know now what was going to happen yesterday, right? We could. So the point is, it's not fair to judge officers based upon the information we have now. You have to judge them upon the information they had at that time going into that house.
I mean, in terms of those 4 visits, and I'm not going to pretend like I know how Farmington PD does what it does, but when you show up for a noise complaint, do they do something, standard operating procedure, where they're going to walk the perimeter of the property?
Yes, that's exactly it. And they'll ask if the neighbors want to talk to us, because a lot of times people want to remain anonymous and don't want to talk so that you could get more details. But I think, as you saw in that video, in the whole clip of the video, they knock on the door, they go around, try and check in the windows, knock again, see if they can hear anything. So this is common practice amongst all police officers when you come to these noise complaints and you don't hear anything, you don't hear any movement, see any movement. In an apartment complex, it's a little bit more difficult than a single-family home. Single-family home, a little bit more windows, the cars are in the driveway, people are here. Here it's an apartment complex. You don't know whether people are there or not. If all the lights are off and there's no noise coming in from the house, there's really nothing further that we can do other than try and call the residents if we can get a phone number for the residents, knock on the door continually. But if we don't hear anything and nothing comes of it, then really, the police are at a disadvantage of being able to actually confront and have a conversation with the people.
And so in the other 3 visits, besides the one where they showed up, they did, go around the perimeter. That's what our viewers are asking. Well, did they do it in the other 3 visits? I'm assuming they did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's SOP.
This is a large apartment building, as people have seen the picture of it. So really, your access is through that front. And so, yes, they would check the windows, check the doors, knock at the house.
Maybe not go in the back, but
maybe not go in the back,
but
yes.
Cursory search, a cursory check. And then the other thing is, if you look at the September 28th visit, there were calls about that somebody was saying, I'm going to break your neck, and there was screaming. And I think on one of the other visits, it said this has been an issue for 4 months. Does that help officers in any way when they show up at something like this, 4 months later or 3 months later in December?
Yeah, and I think the problem is that with this is that on that September visit, we're knocking on the door, and I believe in one of them, and I'm going to mix them up, but I believe in this one, the complainant had said yes, they left. Right, so they got in their cars and left, like after. So we get there and there's they obviously left and nobody was still there. So there was really nothing they couldn't follow up because they had left for the evening.
You and I have talked for a number of years. I'm keenly aware you've been involved in a number of things where you serve our state, not just as a law enforcement officer, but where you're helping get law enforcement policy for the betterment of our state. And one of the questions we got from viewers also is, why didn't these officers know that there was some kind of a DCF history here? And I understand that statutorily, that's not something that your officers can be equipped with now. But as someone like yourself who is on post and with the Connecticut Chiefs of Police, is this something that you've been hearing your fellow chiefs and other law enforcement executives say, we've got to do something about this so these officers have some kind of knowledge before they show up on a call like this? Because in this case, it may not have saved Mimi's life, but there are other cases, similar ones, where it could, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think as a system, as DCF and the Child Advocate, as they start peeling back this case and looking we're constantly looking for how we can do things better. We do work very well with DCF when there are abuse cases, and they will, if something comes in at a hospital, right, with a young child who's injured, they will contact us. We will come in and start that investigation with them. But to your point, when they are looking into these cases, there is no central database that we would say, oh, they've had history with the family. Here's the history. Here are the people that are supposed to be at the house
But
or
is that
not supposed to.
Is that doable?
That's a great question. I think anything's doable. To your point, absolutely. And I think everybody, we obviously, we talk about the fact of sensitive information and not releasing information. And I remind people, police have access to a lot of information that it is against the law for us to divulge. So I understand where DCF is sensitive in some of the information that maybe they have or don't have. But I think that, we would like to share information with them, and I think them sharing with us. I think working in, and I don't want to portray that we're working in silos, because we do work well together, but we work well together when DCF understands that there was a crime involved. But until that point that they've determined, that there's a crime or suspect that there's a crime, really there's not that collaboration. And so that does become sometimes an issue. So it is, I think, something that we will talk about. How can we better communicate? Now with the issue that occurred in Waterbury, now with the issue that occurred here in Farmington, how can we better communicate when there's a child that maybe is, we'll say, unaccounted for?
Mm. I mean, was there any back and forth with DCF during these 4 visits? I assume not, because you didn't see anything that was wrong.
Correct. No, there was no, in these, and again, there was only really one visit. There were 4 different calls by neighbors of loud noise, but really one visit. But there was nothing in there, and I think that when you saw the video, you saw the child in the arms and everything looked okay. There would have been nothing in that case for us to really to notify DCF about.
Now, I know you've investigated a lot of cases in your career. It's a long and storied career, certainly. That video with Carla Garcia lying, apparently, to your officers about the fact that her daughter was down in the basement. How chilling was that when you saw her just be so untruthful, allegedly?
It's hard for me to wrap my head around a parent and a mother lying about that. I don't want to say, I think you saw in more videos, she continued the lie even after she was caught, right? They knew that it's hard, obviously, in the warrant, and you know that the tote was found. They knew the tote was found. The neighbors knew the tote was found. The neighbors believed that it was Mimi in the tote, and they're continuing this. So, a lot of times like you have said, I've investigated a lot of these, and when parents have done something like this, the remorse now is just an outpouring of remorse, and you didn't see that, which is really chilling, to be able to continue that lie, even knowing that, okay, they found her body. And I'm going to say, no, she's still at the house. That was very, very telling of, I think, what we're dealing with here.
I know that at the initial news conference, you all were saying that Mimi was a victim of prolonged abuse, and now it looks like it was more starvation. Or is it both, and is that part and parcel, or is it more that you need to revise that a little bit now that we know a little bit more?
Yeah, and prolonged abuse, we were obviously, we were talking that, starvation doesn't occur overnight. And so by a prolonged abuse, we're talking like weeks. And we didn't know if it was months, but we had in some of the interviews, they had described the fact of some of the things that they were doing to her. And that's why it wasn't an individual act of abuse, right? This was over time, you know, that exact time frame, obviously the medical examiner is working on, but, you know, we have information of when that was, but obviously it took some time for her, for this to be a homicide through starvation.
Yeah. I know it's a difficult thing to talk about, just because, you know, it's hard enough to conceive with an adult, let alone a child. One more question, and I'm trying to be very careful here, because I know you can only release so much at this point, because you're trying to withhold some of the case that the prosecutors are going to have. One thing that keeps striking me is in one of the arrest warrant affidavits, Carla Garcia said, Mimi doesn't want me anymore, and that's why she did this. Can you elaborate at all about what was going on there, what that's about? What does she mean she didn't want her?
Yeah, so we have not gotten any information that supports any of that. So I don't know, to your point, there were a lot of things said that were untruthful. And I think that's what the detectives now are working on. And I was saying every interview they do then results in another 2 additional interviews, because again, we're going to family, friends, people that she spoke with, to try and to recreate those last months. But we do know that Mimi was a thriving young girl with her grandparents, and something changed there. So obviously we're trying to get, that's all a part of what's continuing on the investigation right now. As this prosecution unfolds, I think people will learn more and more, but it is very important, and I understand the public's want to know everything about this case, but it is more important that we get justice. And like I said, the justice wasn't just the arrest. The justice is a successful prosecution. So that's why we have to be just sensitive in the information we release to make sure that we're, you know, working with the state's attorney's office to not harm the case, for releasing information that really we shouldn't release.
Paul Melanson, Director of Public Safety, Farmington, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Really appreciate the time today.